Put your hands where I can see them." The command cut through the late afternoon air like a snapped wire, sharp and sudden, freezing everything in place. The parking lot outside St. Mary's Medical Center went still, the distant hum of traffic fading beneath the crackle of a police radio clipped to a uniform. Red and blue lights pulsed rhythmically across the asphalt, reflecting in long, wavering streaks across puddles left behind by a passing drizzle. Standing in the center of it all was Evelyn Carter, a frail, elderly black woman, her gray curls tucked neatly beneath a worn hat, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small paper bag close to her chest. She hadn't even made it 10 steps from the hospital doors before the voice found her, before the weight of suspicion landed squarely on her shoulders. Deputy Ryan Collins stood several feet away, posture rigid, one hand resting near his belt, eyes narrowed not in curiosity, but in certainty. The kind of certainty that didn't ask questions first. The wind shifted, carrying the faint antiseptic scent from the hospital entrance mixed with the dampness of rain-soaked pavement. Evelyn blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the flashing lights, her breathing measured, steady, as if she were holding onto something deeper than fear. The paper bag crinkled softly in her grip, the sound almost too small to exist in the charged silence. Collins took a step closer, boots pressing firmly against the wet ground, each movement deliberate, controlled. "Ma'am," I said, hands up. He repeated, slower this time, his tone edged with impatience. Around them, a few onlookers had begun to gather, hospital staff in scrubs, a man holding a coffee cup halfway to his lips, a nurse pausing mid-step by the sliding doors. No one spoke. No one moved. The world seemed to narrow to the space between the deputy and the woman. Evelyn's fingers loosened slightly on the bag, as if considering compliance, but her gaze didn't drop. It stayed on him, calm and unshaken, carrying a quiet dignity that didn't match the situation unfolding around her. A faint rustle came from inside the bag as she adjusted her grip, revealing the corner of a prescription label, the edge of a small white box. The hospital doors behind her slid open with a soft mechanical sigh, then closed again, the sound echoing strangely loud in the stillness. Collins's radio crackled at his shoulder, a fragmented voice breaking through. Suspect matching description, elderly female, possible theft. Before dissolving back into static. His jaw tightened, the message reinforcing what he had already decided to believe. Another step forward. Closer now. Close enough to see the fine lines etched into Evelyn's face, the faint sheen of moisture on her skin from the misting rain, the way her shoulders rose and fell with controlled breaths. The lights flashed again, painting her in alternating shades of red and blue, as if the world couldn't decide how to see her. Evelyn slowly lifted one hand, not in surrender, but in careful balance, as though every movement had to be measured against something unseen. The bag shifted again, its contents pressing softly against the thin paper. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, growing louder, then fading again, like a warning no one fully understood yet. Collins didn't look away. He didn't hesitate. In his eyes, the story had already been written. And Evelyn Carter, standing under those flashing lights with nothing but a paper bag in her hands, had already been placed inside it. Evelyn Carter did not raise her hands all at once. Instead, she moved slowly, deliberately, as though each inch of motion carried weight beyond the moment, her fingers loosening from the paper bag just enough for it to rest against her palm, while her other hand lifted halfway, steady despite the faint tremor that came with age, and her voice, when it finally came, was soft but clear. "Officer, there is someone waiting for this," she said, her words neither defensive nor pleading, just anchored in quiet urgency, and the breeze shifted again, brushing the edge of her coat, carrying with it the distant echo of a hospital announcement muffled behind thick glass doors, while Deputy Collins watched her with the same fixed expression, his gaze flicking briefly to the bag and then back to her face, measuring, calculating. Already convinced, and somewhere behind him a car door shut, the sound snapping through the air like a punctuation mark, causing one of the bystanders to flinch before settling back into silence, their attention locked on the unfolding scene. And Evelyn's eyes moved for a moment past Collins, toward the hospital entrance, as if she could see through the walls, as if she could feel the passage of time slipping in small, irreversible increments. And she adjusted her grip again, the bag crinkling softly, revealing more of what it held: a prescription bottle wrapped in thin plastic, a folded receipt, the corner of a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Ordinary things that now seemed fragile under the weight of scrutiny. And Collins took another step forward, closing the distance, his boots leaving faint impressions in the damp surface, his radio giving a short burst of static before falling quiet again. And his voice came lower this time, edged with a firmness that did not invite explanation. "Set the bag down," he instructed, each word spaced, controlled, as though speaking to someone who needed to be managed, not understood. And Evelyn did not resist. She did not argue. She simply bent slightly at the waist, careful, slow, lowering the bag toward the ground with both hands as if placing something delicate, something important. And for a moment the flashing lights caught the clear plastic inside, reflecting a sharp glint that disappeared as quickly as it came, and she straightened. Again, her hands now visible, open, empty, but her posture unchanged, still upright, still composed. And the air between them seemed to tighten, as though the absence of the bag had not eased anything, but instead stripped away the last layer of normalcy, leaving only assumption and authority facing quiet resolve. And Collins glanced down briefly, then back up, his jaw set, his stance unchanged. While behind Evelyn the hospital doors opened once more, a nurse stepping out with hurried steps, scanning the lot with concern before hesitating at the sight of the flashing lights, her expression shifting from urgency to uncertainty. And Evelyn noticed her, just for a second, a flicker in her eyes. Not fear, but something deeper, a silent calculation of time, of consequence. And she drew in a slow breath, the kind that steadies the body when words cannot move things forward. And the wind picked up again, tugging lightly at the edge of the paper bag now resting on the pavement, causing it to tilt just enough for its contents to shift. A faint clink of plastic against plastic, small, almost insignificant. But in that charged stillness, it sounded like something breaking, something slipping, closer to a point that could not be undone. And still, Evelyn Carter did not step back, did not lower her gaze. She simply stood there beneath the flashing lights, her presence quiet but unyielding, as if what she carried was not just in that bag, but in the reason she had refused to disappear. Evelyn Carter had spent most of her life learning how to be seen without drawing attention, how to exist in spaces that were not always built for her, and still leave them better than she found them. And now as she stood under the flickering wash of emergency lights, that same quiet discipline settled into her posture, her shoulders relaxed but firm, her chin level, her breathing slow and measured, as if she were grounding herself in something far deeper than the moment unfolding around her. And Deputy Collins, standing just a few feet away, shifted his weight slightly, not out of uncertainty, but out of habit, the kind of small adjustment made by someone used to being in control, used to having his presence define the situation before a word was even spoken. And his eyes moved once more to the bag resting on the pavement, then back to Evelyn, his expression unchanged, still holding that tight line between authority and assumption, while the faint murmur of bystanders grew just enough to ripple through the silence. Whispers exchanged between strangers who had no context but could feel the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. And Collins raised his hand slightly toward his radio, pressing the button with a practiced motion, his voice low and controlled as he spoke into it, confirming details, requesting verification, each word reinforcing the invisible line he had already drawn between himself and the woman in front of him. And Evelyn listened, not interrupting, not reacting outwardly, but her eyes flickered again toward the hospital entrance, toward the place she had come from, where time moved differently, measured not in minutes but in moments that mattered. And her fingers curled slightly at her sides, not in tension, but in restraint, as though she were holding back the instinct to step past him, to continue forward, to complete something that had not yet been finished. And a faint memory seemed to pass across her face, subtle but present, the kind of expression that carried years within it, long nights, quiet sacrifices, decisions made without recognition. And it settled just behind her eyes before fading again into that same calm resolve. And Collins lowered his hand from the radio, his gaze sharpening as if the confirmation he had received only deepened his certainty. And he took one more step closer, close enough now that the distance between them felt intentional rather than incidental, and the air seemed to tighten once more, pressing in from all sides, while behind Evelyn, the nurse who had stepped outside earlier, took a hesitant step forward, her voice starting to rise before stopping herself, uncertainty holding her in place as she glanced between the deputy and the elderly woman, unsure where she fit in a situation that had already been claimed by authority. And Evelyn noticed her again, that same flicker, returning, stronger this time, not fear, not even urgency, but something that felt like quiet responsibility, and she drew in another slow breath, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that seemed almost disconnected from the tension surrounding her. And she finally spoke again, her voice just as calm as before, but carrying a weight that had not been there moments ago. "It is not for me," she said gently, her eyes steady on Collins. "It is for someone inside." And the words hung there between them, simple, unembellished, but somehow heavier than anything else that had been said. And for a brief second, something in the scene shifted, not visibly, not enough for anyone to name it, but enough to be felt, like the slightest change in pressure before a storm changes direction. And still, Deputy Collins did not move, did not step back, did not lower his gaze, because in his mind, the story had already taken shape, and he was not yet ready to let it change. Deputy Collins exhaled slowly through his nose, the sound barely audible, yet somehow sharp against the fragile quiet, and his gaze dropped once more to the paper bag on the ground, as if it held the answer he had already decided on, his voice tightening just enough to reveal the impatience beneath his control. "Step back from the bag," he said, not louder, but firmer, the kind of tone that expected immediate obedience. And Evelyn did not move at first, not because she was refusing, but because she seemed to be measuring something unseen, something beyond the command itself. And then she took a small step backward, her shoes making a faint sound against the damp pavement, her hands still open at her sides, her posture unchanged, and the wind shifted again, lifting the edge of the paper bag just slightly before letting it fall back into place. And Collins moved forward, closing the gap, his shadow stretching across the ground and brushing the edge of the bag as he crouched just enough to look inside without touching it, his eyes scanning quickly, professionally, yet with a hint of skepticism that lingered even as the contents became clear. And for a brief second, something flickered across his expression, not doubt, not yet, but a hesitation too small for anyone else to notice. And then it was gone, replaced again by that same rigid certainty, and he straightened, his shoulders squaring as he looked back at Evelyn. "You said this is for someone inside," he repeated, his tone now edged with something colder, as if the simplicity of her answer had somehow made the situation more complicated. And Evelyn nodded once, a small, deliberate motion, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Someone who cannot wait." And the words seemed to settle differently this time, not just in the space between them, but in the awareness of those watching. And the nurse by the entrance took another step forward, her concern now visible, her hands clasped together as if resisting the urge to intervene. And Collins noticed the movement out of the corner of his eye, his jaw tightening slightly, the presence of witnesses sharpening his stance rather than softening it. And he reached toward the bag at last, not roughly, not carelessly, but with the controlled motion of someone asserting authority, lifting it just enough to inspect it more closely, the contents shifting again with a faint rustle, the plastic bottle catching the light, the label partially visible now. And Evelyn watched him, not with anger, not with fear, but with a quiet intensity that seemed to carry years of understanding, as if she had seen moments like this before, in different forms, with different faces, and had learned long ago that raising her voice would not change what needed to be seen. And Collins turned the bag slightly, his brow tightening as he read the label, the silence stretching just a fraction longer than before. And then the radio at his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, more urgent, a dispatcher's voice breaking through with clearer words. "Unit 12, confirm location, possible emergency at St. Mary's Pediatric Wing. Repeat, Pediatric Wing." And the word hung there, cutting through the scene like a sudden shift in light, and Evelyn's eyes moved again toward the hospital, this time not briefly, not subtly, but with unmistakable focus, and something in her expression changed, not panic, not desperation, but a quiet insistence that seemed to press against the moment itself, and Collins froze for just a second, the bag still in his hand, the weight of it suddenly feeling different, as if it no longer belonged to the narrative he had built, and yet he did not move aside, not yet, because stepping back would mean acknowledging something he was not ready to face, and so the silence returned, heavier now, charged with something neither of them had spoken, something waiting just beneath the surface, ready to be revealed. The dispatcher's voice faded into static, but the word pediatric lingered in the air like something that refused to be ignored, and Deputy Collins felt it settle somewhere deeper than the surface of his thoughts, yet his grip on the paper bag remained firm, almost instinctive, as if letting go too soon would unravel the control he had built over the situation, and he straightened fully now, the flashing lights reflecting across his badge and the plastic bottle inside the bag, his expression tightening as he looked back at Evelyn, searching for something that would confirm what he already believed rather than challenge it. "You should have stayed where you were told," he said, his tone shifting slightly, less sharp but more guarded, as though he were reinforcing a line that had begun to blur, and Evelyn did not respond immediately, her eyes steady, her breathing even, but there was a subtle weight behind her silence now, something that felt heavier than before, and the nurse near the entrance finally stepped forward another pace, her voice low but urgent. "Officer, if that is medication," she began, but stopped when Collins lifted a hand slightly without looking at her, not aggressive, not dismissive in a loud way, but enough to hold her in place, enough to remind everyone present who controlled the moment, and the air seemed to tighten again, the sound of distant footsteps echoing faintly from inside the hospital, while the wind carried a sharper chill across the lot, brushing against Evelyn's coat, causing it to shift slightly around her frame. And she took a small step forward this time, not closing the distance completely, but enough to signal intention, enough to make it clear that she was not finished, and her voice came again, just as calm, but carrying something deeper, something that did not ask for permission. "There is a child upstairs," she said, each word measured, "and those medicines are already late." And the simplicity of it landed differently, not dramatic, not raised, but undeniable in its clarity. And Collins's jaw tightened again, the words pressing against the certainty he had been holding on to, and for a brief second his eyes dropped to the label once more, the printed name, the dosage, the instructions, details that did not match the narrative he had formed just minutes ago, and the radio. At his shoulder crackled again, more urgent this time. "Unit 12, confirm status, pediatric team requesting immediate assistance, repeat, immediate." And the repetition carried a different weight now, one that no longer felt distant or unrelated, and Collins shifted his stance, just slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to break the rigid stillness he had maintained, and behind him the nurse stepped forward again, more firmly now, her voice no longer hesitant. "Sir, if that is for the pediatric wing, we do not have time to delay." And the words hung there, not confrontational, but firm in a way that challenged the moment itself, and Evelyn's eyes remained on Collins, steady, patient, but no longer waiting in the same way. There was a quiet urgency there now, a line that had been reached, and the paper bag in his hand suddenly felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it contained, but because of what it represented, and for the first time since he had stepped into the scene, Deputy Collins hesitated, not visibly to everyone, not enough to break his posture completely, but enough for the moment to shift, enough for the certainty he had relied on to begin to fracture, even if only slightly. And in that fragile space between decision and realization, everything seemed to hold its breath. The wind died down without warning, leaving the parking lot wrapped in a strange, suspended stillness, as if even the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next, and the flashing red and blue lights no longer felt like motion, but like a slow pulse echoing through something deeper, something heavier, and Deputy Collins stood there with the paper bag still in his hand, his grip no longer firm but not yet released, caught somewhere between decision and doubt, and for the first time his eyes did not immediately return to Evelyn but lingered on the label, tracing the printed name again, the dosage instructions, the timestamp from the pharmacy barely 30 minutes earlier, and his breathing shifted, subtle but present, a slight pause between inhale and exhale, as if his body had begun to process something his mind was resisting, and the sounds around him seemed to fade. The distant traffic, the murmurs of onlookers, even the faint hum of the patrol car, all dimmed into the background, leaving only the quiet rhythm of the moment itself. And Evelyn Carter stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her hands still open at her sides. But there was something different now, not in her stance, but in the way the silence seemed to settle around her, not heavy, not tense, but grounded, like someone who understood that not every battle was fought with words. And she did not step forward again, did not repeat herself. She simply waited, not passively, but with a quiet certainty that felt stronger than any urgency. She could have spoken, and the nurse near the entrance had stopped moving as well, her hands clasped tightly together now, her eyes fixed on the bag in Collins's hand, as if that small object had become the center of everything. And a faint sound came from inside the hospital, a distant announcement over the intercom, followed by the quick echo of footsteps running down a corridor. And though the words were not clear, the tone carried urgency, unmistakable and sharp, and Collins heard it, even if he did not fully register it. And his shoulders shifted again, the smallest movement, but enough to break the rigid frame he had held since the beginning. And he glanced up, finally meeting Evelyn's eyes again, and something in that look lingered. Not confrontation, not defiance, but recognition, the kind that did not come from what was said, but from what had been felt. And for a brief second, the lines that had defined the moment blurred, the uniform, the authority, the assumptions, all softening just enough to reveal the human hesitation beneath them. And the bag in his hand seemed heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of what it represented, a choice, a delay, a consequence not yet fully realized. And Evelyn's gaze did not waver, but it was no longer asking, no longer explaining it, was simply present, steady, as if she had already accepted whatever came next. And the flashing lights reflected across both of them, painting their faces in alternating colors that made everything feel unreal, suspended between right and wrong, between action and consequence. And in that quiet, fragile space, where no one spoke and nothing moved, the moment stretched just long enough for something to shift inside Deputy Collins. Something small but undeniable, like the first crack in a wall that had stood unchallenged for far too long. The crack in Deputy Collins's certainty widened not with a sudden realization, but with something quieter, more unsettling, as the details he had dismissed began to rearrange themselves into a truth he could no longer ignore. And his fingers loosened slightly around the paper bag, the thin material shifting with a soft sound that seemed louder now, as if the silence around them had sharpened every small movement. And he looked down once more, not quickly this time, not with the same dismissive glance, but with a focus that lingered, tracing the prescription label more carefully, the name printed there, the dosage instructions, the timing, all aligning too precisely with the urgency crackling through his radio just moments ago. And his jaw tightened, not in authority, but in recognition. And for the first time, the narrative he had constructed began to fall apart piece by piece, replaced by something far less comfortable, something that placed him not as the one maintaining order, but as the one standing in its way. And he inhaled slowly, the breath deeper than before, as if his body needed more air to process what his mind was finally allowing. And the nurse stepped closer now, no longer hesitant, her voice steady though still respectful. "Sir, that medication is for a pediatric emergency upstairs," she said, her words clear, grounded in fact rather than emotion. And Collins did not respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the bag, but something in his posture shifted. Again, the rigid line of his shoulders softening just enough to reveal the weight settling into them. And he finally looked up at Evelyn, really looked this time, not as a suspect, not as a figure matching a description, but as a person standing in front of him with purpose. And the calm in her expression did not feel passive anymore. It felt deliberate, earned, the kind of calm that came from knowing what mattered and refusing to let it be dismissed. And her voice, when it came again, was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the stillness with undeniable clarity. "He is 8 years old," she said, her eyes steady on his. and he has already waited too long. And the words landed with a weight that no radio call, no instruction, no assumption could override. And Collins felt it, not as a command, but as something deeper, something that reached past protocol and into consequence. And the image formed without permission, a child upstairs, a room filled with urgency, time slipping in ways that could not be reversed, and his grip on the bag loosened further, the edges crinkling softly as his fingers shifted, and for a brief second, the world seemed to narrow again, but differently this time, not around suspicion, but around realization. And the flashing lights no longer felt like authority, they felt like interruption, and the distance between him and Evelyn changed without either of them moving. Because the space was no longer defined by control, but by understanding that had come too late to ignore, and he swallowed once, the motion subtle but visible, and then, slowly, carefully, as if acknowledging the weight of what he had done without speaking it aloud, Deputy Collins lowered the paper bag back toward her, not abruptly, not ceremonially, just a simple motion that carried more meaning than anything he had said since the moment began. And the silence that followed was no longer tense, but heavy in a different way, filled with the quiet truth of a mistake recognized. And for the first time, he stepped back, not because he was told to, but because he understood that standing in place any longer would mean standing in the way of something far more important than himself. The paper bag settled back into Evelyn Carter's hands with a softness that contrasted everything that had led up to it, the thin material folding slightly under her fingers as she closed them around it again, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. And for a brief moment neither of them moved, the space between her and Deputy Collins, filled with something unspoken, something heavier than tension, something closer to recognition, and Collins's hand remained suspended in the air for just a second longer than necessary before dropping back to his side, his posture no longer rigid, no longer defined by control, but by the weight of what he had almost delayed. And the nurse did not wait this time. She stepped forward fully, her voice clear and focused. "Ma'am, we need to get that upstairs right now," she said, already turning slightly toward the entrance as if preparing to guide her. And Evelyn nodded once, a small, deliberate motion, her eyes briefly meeting Collins's again, not accusing, not triumphant, just present. And in that look there was no trace of anger, no demand for apology, only a quiet acknowledgement that the moment had passed, and something more important remained ahead. And she turned then, her steps steady despite the urgency surrounding her, moving toward the hospital doors with a calm that did not rush but did not hesitate, the paper bag held carefully against her side, and the nurse moved alongside her, pushing the door open as they reached it, the sound of the automatic mechanism sliding wide cutting through the stillness. And as Evelyn crossed the threshold, the world outside seemed to fall away behind her, replaced by the brighter, sharper light of the hospital interior, the distant echo of voices, the quick rhythm of footsteps moving with purpose. And for a brief second, just before the doors closed, Collins caught a glimpse of the hallway beyond, a nurse rushing past with a clipboard, a doctor speaking urgently into a phone, the kind of movement that carried consequences in every second. And then the doors slid shut, sealing the moment, leaving him standing alone beneath the fading pulse of red and blue lights. And the silence that followed was no longer charged with tension, but filled with something quieter, something heavier. And Collins exhaled slowly, the breath uneven this time, as if it carried more than just air, and he looked down at his empty hands, the absence of the bag now more noticeable than its presence had been, and the weight of the moment settled into him. Fully, not as a sudden shock, but as a steady realization, and he turned slightly, glancing toward the bystanders who had begun to disperse, their murmurs soft, their attention already shifting back to their own lives, leaving behind only the echo of what had happened. And Collins remained where he was for a moment longer, his shoulders lowering just slightly, the edge of authority replaced by something quieter, something more human. And though no words were spoken, no apology offered aloud, the shift was there, visible in the way he no longer stood in the center of the scene, but just outside of it, as if understanding, at last, that not every moment was his to control, and that some carried consequences that could not be undone, only acknowledged. The red and blue lights continued to pulse, but slower now, softer against the emptying parking lot, their reflections stretching across the wet pavement like fading echoes of something that had already passed. And Deputy Collins remained where he was, his gaze fixed on the hospital doors long after they had closed, as if expecting them to open again, as if waiting for something that would confirm that the moment had resolved itself beyond his reach. And the air felt different now, no longer tight with tension, but open, almost hollow, the kind of quiet that follows after something important has shifted. And he drew in a breath, deeper than before, the cool evening air filling his lungs as he exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction more, the posture of authority easing into something less defined, less certain. And he turned slightly, his eyes moving across the lot, taking in the details he had ignored earlier, the scattered puddles, the distant glow of streetlights, the faint outline of people returning to their routines. And for a moment, everything felt ordinary again, except for the weight that remained with him, subtle but undeniable, and his hand lifted toward his radio before stopping midway, hovering there as if the instinct to act had nowhere to land. And then it dropped back to his side, the gesture unfinished, and the silence stretched on, not demanding anything, not offering resolution, just existing. And inside the hospital, unseen but felt, time continued to move, footsteps quick, voices low but urgent, a world that did not pause for hesitation. And Collins knew that now in a way he had not just minutes before, not because someone had told him, but because he had almost stood in its way. And the realization settled deeper, not sharp, not overwhelming, but steady, like something that would not fade once the lights were gone. And a faint breeze moved through the lot again, lifting the edge of a discarded receipt near the curb before letting it fall back, the small motion catching his attention for just a second before he looked away, his focus returning to the hospital doors one last time. And then, slowly, he stepped back, not hurried, not dramatic, just a simple shift of position that placed him further from the center of what had happened, and his gaze lowered briefly, not in defeat, but in thought, the kind that comes when certainty has been replaced by something more complicated, something more honest. And the patrol car behind him idled quietly, its lights still flashing, but he reached out after a moment and switched them off, the sudden absence of color leaving the lot in a softer, more natural glow. And in that quiet, with the artificial urgency gone, what remained felt clearer, simpler. And he stood there for a few seconds longer, breathing evenly now, before turning toward his vehicle, his steps measured, his pace unhurried. And as he moved away, the space he left behind did not close in the same way it had before. It remained open, carrying the quiet imprint of a moment where something had almost been lost, and something else, less visible but more lasting, had taken its place. And inside, beyond walls he could no longer see through, a door opened somewhere, a voice called out, and the rhythm of life continued, untouched by the hesitation that had nearly altered it, leaving behind only the silent understanding that some moments do not need words to be remembered, only the stillness that follows them.